Uganda just shocked the world. But why? Uganda has just made a bold and unexpected move. It's officially banning the export of all unprocessed raw materials, from gold and coffee to maize and fish. No delays, no exceptions, just a full stop. In today's global economy, where exports drive national revenue, why would a country suddenly shut off such a major source of income? Let's break it down. The abrupt move by Uganda to prohibit the export of any raw materials was not unexpected. It's not an impulsive experiment or a daring bet. It is the outcome of decades of value loss that went unnoticed. Not because Uganda lacked resources, but rather because the international system was never built to allow it to retain them. It always appeared to be trade from the outside. Uganda mines resources or grows crops, sells them to international purchasers, makes foreign exchange, and then utilizes that money to buy goods. It's economic activity on paper. In actuality, it was entrapment since Uganda was exporting power in addition to goods. Let's use coffee as a straightforward example. One of the top 10 countries in the world for coffee production is Uganda. However, there is very little chance that Uganda's name will be on the cappuccino's packaging or revenues if you order one at a cafe in London, Berlin, or New York. Although the beans originated in Uganda, all of the money-making processes, branding, roasting, marketing, and retailing, take place elsewhere. It was cents per kilogram for Uganda. Millions went to the West. This issue is not exclusive to Uganda. The issue is with the system. One in which Africa continues to be the backbone of the world economy, supplying raw materials while the wealth of other nations' industries rises steadily. Furthermore, the trap wasn't a coincidence. It was designed. Colonialism was more than just annexation. Patterns were planted. The British did not connect Ugandans when they constructed railways in the country. They were linking the closest port with resources located inland. The entire infrastructure was built for extraction, not for regional trade or national cohesion. The same reasoning held true even after independence. The narrative was continuously promoted by international banks, aid organizations, and trading partners. Concentrate on your strengths, unprocessed exports. It was referred to as comparative advantage. However, it was actually a prison. Because in a society that rewards polish, what happens if you can only exchange rawness? You lose. Uganda has also lost, again and again. Each time, fish that could have been canned locally was shipped away. Each time, gold is left as dust rather than as bullion. Uganda lost billions of dollars in potential revenue each time its cotton was spun in Europe rather than Kampala. The world penalized those who failed to cross the finish line and only awarded finished worth, not because it didn't work hard. Museveni's recent actions were not an overreaction. It's a reckoning. Uganda is declaring that it will no longer participate in a game that has been rigged until the rules are changed. It's not simply economics either. It is its identity. Ugandans have seen their nation serve as a supply rather than a brand for far too long. Even when the products originate in its territory, its name is rarely found on the labels of international items. Additionally, the ban is a cultural adjustment. Regaining authorship is the goal. Stating that value is created here, not only where resources come from. Refusing to export raw materials is dangerous, of course. Uganda is aware that it is infringing on the rights of influential foreign customers who favor low-cost input, and no questions asked. However, sometimes a country needs to burn bridges to ensure it never returns, not to retreat. Closing doors was not the goal of the ban. It had to do with making new ones open. Ones that result in Ugandans, not foreign intermediaries, operating factories, innovation labs, processing facilities, branding companies, and export systems. Who will purchase our crops is no longer a question Uganda asks. Why haven't we been selling our completed goods, it asks. Because trade isn't the true question. It has to do with change. And ownership is where that change begins. Not only of resources, but also of the whole value chain that encircles them. What is the fuel, therefore, if this ban is the spark? Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. Uganda was faced with a more profound dilemma after deciding to cease exporting its wealth in its raw form. Now what? Because export restrictions don't produce industries on their own. You have to make a new path if you close the previous one. Additionally, value addition paves the way for Uganda's new path. However, this goes beyond factories and machinery. It's about at last providing an answer to the question, what does an economy constructed by Ugandans look like? Imagine this to get a sense of the scale of this change. The Ugandan economy operated like a cargo bay for many centuries. Products were shipped out as quickly as possible after arriving from mines and farms. The whole model is now being turned upside down. Uganda is attempting to keep commodities in situ so they can be processed, refined, packaged, and branded before they ever leave, as opposed to rushing them to the port. And it goes beyond economics. It's the architecture. A remodeling on a national scale. Let's use cotton. Cotton was harvested, weighed, baled, and exported under the previous system. Uganda awaited the upcoming season when the money was returned in foreign currency. Under the new approach, however, the same cotton might be dyed and styled into Ugandan fashion labels, spun into thread in Jinja, and woven into fabric in Kampala. Only after which it was shipped. There is no additional difference in the profit margins. It is explosive. In addition to the raw cotton, Uganda benefits from each and every layer of transformation that comes into contact with it. Cotton is only one of the materials. Apply that to bananas, coffee, fish, gold, corn, and lumber. The outcomes are astounding. But this is the more profound reality. Uganda's actions are not solely motivated by financial gain. It's doing this to steer the story. You see, the story is someone else's when you export raw materials. The consumer sees a French brand, a European logo, and possibly an Italian roast when a Ugandan coffee bean winds up in a cafe in Paris. Uganda is not seen. However, you're not only exporting a product when you roast it locally and name coffee as Kampala Roast or Pearl Arabica. Identity is being exported by you. Identity also sells. Consult Ethiopia. They became well known throughout the world because to their coffee brand. Ask Ghana, which is at last starting to produce chocolate. Uganda now realizes what these nations are demonstrating. Value extends beyond what you produce. It's in how the world perceives your creation. Uganda is not relying solely on investor miracles or state control to achieve this. It's starting a race in the private sector. Cooperatives, agro-industrialists, and entrepreneurs. Everyone is welcome to help create the new Uganda. The role of the government to clear obstacles, supply electricity, lower taxes for area producers, and create access to continental and regional markets. This implies that the financial industry must change as well. It is becoming more difficult for Uganda's traditional banks, which are used to lending on short-term trade cycles, to fund long-term industrial endeavors. Previously requiring a loan to transport crops, a farmer now requires funding to establish a small-scale processing facility. It's a leap. Additionally, Uganda needs to be prepared to offer incentives and risk buffers. However, the most innovative concept in all of this may not be found in factories or boardrooms. The farms are where it is, because farmers need to perceive themselves as more than producers if they want this industrial ecology to function. They must regard themselves as internal economy suppliers. The supply chain of a flour mill now includes the maize grower. These days, a packaging line includes the fish catcher. A nationwide roasting business is currently being fueled by the coffee grower. Agriculture's language must change. From price and yield to ownership and integration. It's not that simple. It's not quick. However, it is required. Many African nations are too scared to follow Uganda's example. If it renders us helpless, we will be useless. Building slowly and steadily is preferable to selling quickly and being weak. The question now is, how can a country be prepared, psychologically as well as logistically, for this type of change? You can construct every factory on the planet. Install the top-notch equipment. Pour the concrete. Connect generators. Additionally, affix signage that read "Made in Uganda" on each warehouse wall. However, an economy cannot exist without the individuals who can manage, repair, run, market, and grow such industries. Your furnishings are pricey. The crucial stage in Uganda's new course is now. Transformation of human capital. Uganda is now facing the most difficult task of all after cutting off the supply of raw exports and creating a domestic value ecosystem. Getting its citizens ready to control and manage that ecosystem. Because being a food technologist is not something that can be done suddenly. A miner cannot be expected to become an expert in metallurgy overnight. Furthermore, a low-skilled attitude cannot be used to create a high-value economy. Who will construct this new Uganda is the question at hand. The nation must first face a harsh reality in order to respond to that. Its employees were not prepared for this future. Similar to many other post-colonial African educational systems, Uganda's was designed to provide clerks, public servants, and low-level technicians, functionaries for an external economic system. It was not designed to generate inventors for industry. Instead of teaching students how to manage food safety labs, create packaging systems, or handle export logistics, the program taught them to write reports. However, that is rapidly changing. Nationwide, vocational training is experiencing a renaissance. Schools are springing up in locations like Mbale, Budu, and Fort Portal, emphasizing industry-relevant skills over stale theory. From quality control and agro-processing methods to machine operations and digital branding, Uganda is at last educating its youth to create value on their own rather than wait for employment. However, it goes beyond new establishments. It's about shifting the perspective. For far too long, a lot of young Ugandans were taught that obtaining a degree overseas, working in a bank, or leaving the country were the only ways to succeed. However, the media, business community, and government are now working together to change that narrative. Expert labor is not a substitute. It's constructing the nation. For the destiny of the nation, a fruit dryer in Masaka is as important as a diplomat in Geneva. This change in perspective is particularly important in rural regions. Because industrialization won't occur from the capital outward if Uganda is to actually industrialize. The villages must be the starting point. Miners, farmers, and fishermen need to be schooled in preservation, processing, packing, and profit in addition to extraction. Partnerships can help with it. Uganda is currently collaborating with Pan-African organizations and development agencies to bridge the gap between local knowledge and international competence. The goal? To avoid creating enterprises that are permanently reliant on foreign technicians, a trap that many industrializing countries fall into. Rather, Uganda aims to develop its own supply chain analysts, export negotiators, food scientists, and product designers. Pilot projects are already yielding results in locations such as Lyra and Arua. Young business people are converting fish into vacuum-sealed treats for local markets, mangoes into pulp, and cassava into flour. They're innovating as well as manufacturing. And they're doing it in Luganda, Swahili, and Runyankole because industrial pride needs to be based on cultural ownership, not because they're opposing English. However, there is another perspective that is frequently overlooked: women. Women have always been essential to Uganda's raw material economy. They gathered, separated, moved, dried, and cleaned. However, they were hardly ever considered stakeholders. Now, that is changing. Today, women are at the helm of many of Uganda's most promising agro-processing initiatives. Additionally, the government is advocating for more, including training programs that give priority to female entrepreneurs, land changes that ensure processing rights, and microcredit for cooperatives run by women. Because the future must be inclusive if it is to be really national. However, this need for skills goes beyond only addressing the skills shortages of today. It's about getting ready for a world economy that is changing more quickly than Uganda can construct roads. Blockchain logistics, AI, and climate science. Uganda must develop not only laborers but also innovators, disruptors, and intellectuals. This entails changing academic institutions, connecting research facilities to practical issues, and making sure that no brilliant brain is lost to poverty or ineffective policies. And the world will begin to take notice once Uganda possesses the necessary abilities. Because producing something isn't enough. You must have the ability to market it, compete, and succeed. Uganda must now get ready for its next conflict in a world where trade obstacles and gatekeepers have been established. Not only producing goods, but also vying for customers. You would think that creating something worthwhile would be sufficient. Uganda would undoubtedly find willing customers outside if it produced superior roasted coffee, fruit pulp, packaged fish, or polished gold. However, this is not how the world economy functions. Global commerce is a rigged obstacle course since it isn't a free race. Furthermore, if Uganda wins, the referees are frequently the ones who stand to lose the most. The catch is this. Uganda's role was straightforward for many years. Send low-cost raw resources to wealthy nations who will refine, brand, and resell them to the rest of the globe. These basic materials served as the foundation for entire industries, occupations, and empires in those wealthier nations. Imagine now that we're withholding it from them. We'll handle the processing ourselves. Our goal is to sell the finished item. It's more than just a disturbance. Their business models are under risk. Therefore, the worldwide market's answer isn't a fair greeting. It includes safety certifications, trade restrictions, and resistance. When Uganda was exporting raw materials, it was never required to meet regulations pertaining to record keeping, chemical traces, storage temperatures, and packaging were all created with the stated powers in mind. Non-tariff protectionism is the term for it. And it's the way that strong nations defend their home sectors while seeming to be proponents of free trade. For instance, a Ugandan business wishing to export processed pineapples to the EU may encounter hundreds of unstated obstacles, such as barcode and traceability systems that are too expensive for the majority of local exporters and pesticide trace limits that Uganda didn't even test for. The majority of local exporters cannot afford these systems. It's not an accident. They are filters. When trying to move up the value chain, Uganda is now discovering how stringent those filters are. What is Uganda's response then? By changing alliances and revising the rules, rather than by pleading. First, the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, which promises a $3.4 trillion market and for Africans, is one of the regional and continental trade frameworks to which Uganda is strengthening its commitment. This is crucial because it enables Uganda to expand regionally before venturing into the more complex realm of trade dominated by the West. Consider this: a product that was refined in Kampala, shipped to Nairobi, tested in Kigali, then made its way to Accra before being presented to Berlin. That's the plan. Before facing the empire, conquer the continent. Second, Uganda is aggressively seeking South-South alliances with nations such as China, India, Brazil, Turkey, and Indonesia. Even if they are still competitive, these countries frequently provide more practical trade partnerships, fewer regulatory barriers, and most importantly, a common goal of dismantling Western monopolies. However, Uganda is using more than simply diplomacy. Additionally, it is spending money on trade intelligence. understanding which certifications to pursue, which digital platforms to join, which markets require, and how to effectively communicate Uganda's narrative. For here's another reality. Power lies in branding. Processed commodities from Uganda must be more than merely good. They must be attractive. Have faith. Celebrate. Uganda now needs to develop its story, much like Swiss chocolate, Italian leather, or Japanese electronics indicate prestige. One that claims to be of world-class quality. Indeed, it originated in Africa. For this reason, Uganda's Ministry of Trade is rebranding export identities in collaboration with private sector firms. Uganda is learning how to market a perception as well as a product, from packaging design to storytelling. Because perception is more important than price in today's environment. However, despite new markets, astute branding, and astute strategy, Uganda needs to be prepared for one thing at all times: reprisal. Prominent companies may use lobbyists, trade attorneys, or even disinformation campaigns to thwart Uganda's ascent if they fear losing control of African raw materials. Other nations that attempted to ascend the ladder have already experienced it. Therefore, defense systems, legal knowledge, digital surveillance, diplomatic clout, and local media that can counter sabotage narratives must all be a part of Uganda's progress. A free market is not being entered by Uganda. A contested battlefield is about to be entered. It's armed now, though. Not simply with goods, but also with a new economic identity, strategy, and purpose. Uganda is currently facing a challenge that few countries face at this point in their growth as they forge a route into international markets, overcome trade gatekeepers, establish their brand, and exercise control over their value chain. How can you develop without doing the same mistakes as your predecessors? Since the nations who currently control the majority of the world's economy didn't get their clean, let's face it. They converted carbon into capital, destroyed forests, dumped trash into rivers, and operated companies using coal. The planet suffered as a result of their affluence. And those same countries, now wearing green policy suits, dare to preach sustainability while Uganda is ready to industrialize. Uganda, however, is not fooled by hypocrisy. Rather, it is opting to venture where very few developing countries have ventured. Intentionally industrialize. Expand, but in a balanced manner. Don't burn, but build. Climate is not the only factor here. Long-term survival is the goal. Because if the soil becomes barren, what good are jobs and food processing? If the water becomes poisonous, what good is it to mine gold? Uganda is aware that it must guide Africa into a new era without destroying its nature. Climate-conscious capitalism is a daring and surprising pillar that the nation is currently connecting with its economic transformation. The most obvious sign. Many observers were taken aback when Uganda introduced its first national carbon market legislation in early 2025, since they had anticipated that Europe, not East Africa, would take the lead on climate change. Uganda, however, is challenging that presumption. Rather of waiting to be monitored by international environmental watchdogs, it is creating its own regulations and drawing in investors who are fed up with clean industries and shady transactions. There is more to these carbon regulations than just the law. A green value proposition includes these. Uganda offers more than simply land and labor. It provides unblemished credibility. An unseen environmental price tag won't be attached to a processed food product produced in Uganda. An eco-compliance paper trail will accompany a mineral that has been processed in Uganda. Making sustainability a selling point rather than a burden is the goal here. Additionally, it is already having an impact on how regional industries function. Solar integration is being incorporated into the design of new factories in Uganda. Biogas is being tested at agro-processing facilities. Energy-efficient dryers are used by coffee roasters. Most remarkably, certain industrial parks are being designed as circular economies. where trash from one industry is used as raw material for another. But carbon is only one aspect of climate action. It refers to humans. It's a reference to land. It's a sign of justice. For this reason, Uganda's land use reforms are subtly transforming rural areas. The government is promoting climate-smart zoning, locating agro-processing hubs close to existing farming communities, lowering transportation emissions, and enabling farmers to be production partners rather than victims of industrial development, rather than forcing it into delicate ecosystems or uprooting rural communities. With the help of this strategy, local economies become resilient clusters where the environment, energy, education, and jobs all support one another. It is enormously stronger than the extractive model, but it is slower, because long-term growth transforms lives, whereas rapid growth impresses economists. The latter is what Uganda desires. It desires ownership as well. Intellectual property, green technology development, climate-resilient crop testing, and funding local climate experts who can develop solutions based on Ugandan realities rather than imported models are all examples of this. In order to ensure that future industrial workers know how to process maize in a way that is profitable, environmentally friendly, and respectful of the land that feeds them, there is even a move to incorporate climate education into vocational programs. A fresh perspective on what it means to be a developing nation is beginning to take shape. Uganda is demonstrating that progress need not resemble oil spills and smokestacks. It can take the form of community-owned energy systems, eco-packaged exports, women-run processing centers, and solar rooftops. Most significantly, it's demonstrating that you can simultaneously say no to exploitation and yes to success. This endeavor is no longer solely a national one. It serves as the continent's blueprint. Uganda won't just rewrite its destiny if it is successful in developing robust businesses, trained labor, international exports, and a green economy without succumbing to debt, dependency, or pollution. It will change the fundamental laws of development. Was this, in your opinion, greatly needed? Should other countries follow suit? Should they take a cue from Uganda?